What if I told you there was once a day in American history when thousands of people gathered on hilltops, crowded city streets, and even climbed rooftops because they were convinced the world was about to crack open? A day when the United States watched the impossible unfold in the sky, and no one knew whether it was science, sorcery, or a sign from God. This is not a myth. This is a documented, real event, and it is one of the strangest stories to ever echo across the American timeline. On the morning of July 20, 1860, the residents of the East Coast woke to a strange sense that something was off. Newspapers later described the air as uncannily still, not stormy, not hot, just silent, as if the atmosphere itself were waiting for something. In Connecticut, fishermen setting off before dawn noticed an odd brightness along the horizon. Not quite sunrise, not quite lightning. In New York, early commuters heading toward the harbor stopped in their tracks at the sight of the faintest green shimmer curling across the sky. And along the hills of Pennsylvania, farm families paused their morning chores as a soft, metallic glow drifted overhead. But no one understood what they were about to witness. By noon, entire towns across the Northeast seemed to be buzzing with the same rumor. Something is coming across the sky, something big.
And they were right. At approximately 1:15 p.m., a blinding streak suddenly tore across the heavens, a fiery, splitting line that looked, as one witness described, like the sky itself had been cracked open by a burning sword. Children screamed, men dropped their tools, women pointed upward with trembling hands. No one had ever seen anything like it. The great flash was followed by the appearance of a long, glowing object drifting silently across the sky. Unlike a shooting star, it did not vanish. Unlike lightning, it did not flicker. It burned steadily, stretching across the heavens like a molten ribbon of white and gold, visible from New York to Washington, D.C., and as far west as Missouri. Newspaper accounts described it as a fire tail stretching from one end of the firmament to the other, a celestial flame glowing with unnatural steadiness, a burning line fixed in the sky like a crack in a sheet of glass. It lasted for nearly 5 full minutes, an eternity in astronomical terms. Citizens poured into streets. Church bells rang as pastors urged people to pray. In several towns, people collapsed to their knees, fearing Judgment Day. But this was no comet, no ordinary meteor, and definitely no illusion. It was something far stranger. What people were witnessing was a bolide meteor, a rare, massive space rock exploding in Earth's atmosphere and splitting into 2 gigantic pieces. Scientists now classify this event as one of the most powerful and visible meteoric explosions in North American history. But in 1860, astronomy was still developing, and common people had few explanations for such a phenomenon. One young eyewitness, however, would grow up to become one of America's most beloved artists, and he would immortalize the event in a way no one expected. In the small town of Newton, Massachusetts, a 35-year-old painter named Frederic Edwin witnessed the glowing meteor with his own eyes. Church was already known for his breathtaking landscapes, vast mountains, dramatic skies, and scenes of American wilderness. But nothing he had ever painted compared to what he saw that day. He later wrote to a colleague,
"The heavens parted with a brilliance I had never imagined. I knew instantly it was a vision meant to be captured." For days afterward, Church interviewed witnesses, sketched the sky from memory, and gathered newspaper descriptions. He spent months working on a canvas he believed would preserve the moment for future generations. The result was the hauntingly beautiful painting, The Meteor of 1860. For over a century, art lovers admired the painting for its beauty, without realizing it depicted a real astronomical event. It wasn't until 2010, when two scientists compared historical witness reports, old newspapers, and Church's painting, that they connected the dots. This single painting was the only visual record of the 1860 bolide, and it was astonishingly accurate. But the story doesn't end there, because the meteor inspired someone else, too. On the same night the meteor burned across the sky, a young poet in Massachusetts stepped outside his house and stared upward in awe. His name was Walt Whitman. He was not yet the legendary American icon we know today, but the meteor would leave an imprint on him that resurfaced years later. In his poem, Year of Meteors, Whitman wrote about a strange, huge meteor procession, flame-like, wandering red as a hot iron, splitting, dividing, streaking the heavens. For decades, scholars debated whether Whitman have exaggerated the event or simply imagined it. But modern research proved he was describing the 1860 meteor exactly as others had seen it. So the fiery line across the sky didn't just shock America, it entered its art, its poetry, and the fabric of its cultural memory. While artists and poets found inspiration, ordinary Americans experienced something very different: fear. The Civil War was less than a year away. Tensions were rising. The country was on edge. Many believed the meteor was a sign, a warning. Newspapers from 1860 preserved some of the most dramatic reactions. In New York, hundreds gathered outside churches. In Philadelphia, a crowd reportedly sang hymns until the meteor faded. In Ohio, a farmer wrote in his diary that his cattle panicked and fled as if chased by some ghostly fire. In Maryland, one woman fainted and woke screaming, convinced the sky fire was a symbol of coming war. One of the most remarkable accounts came from a small Pennsylvania town where an elderly Civil War veteran, one who had fought decades earlier in the Mexican-American War, told his neighbors, "I have seen cannon fire tear apart the night, but never have I seen the heavens ignite." People believed the meteor was a fragment of the sun, a divine warning, a bad omen for the Union, a signal of the end times, a celestial battle between angels. Every wild theory found an audience. It was, after all, the mid-19th century. Science was rising, but superstition still had deep roots. While the general public was overwhelmed, scientists of the era were equally baffled. Astronomers in New York and Boston rushed to document the event. Harvard's observatory received letters from dozens of witnesses, each describing the meteor in different words but with similar structure: long, burning, steady, splitting in two. Eventually, astronomers reached a conclusion. The meteor was likely hundreds of feet long. It was traveling at over 40,000 miles per hour. It exploded due to atmospheric pressure. The explosion caused the long, glowing streak seen across the country. Fragments likely fell into the Great Lakes or possibly the Atlantic. Although they didn't have modern equipment, their analysis was shockingly accurate. Today, NASA confirms that the event was one of the brightest bolide explosions ever recorded on the North American continent. But what made this meteor truly extraordinary wasn't just its brightness,
It was its path. Most meteors burn up instantly. But this one moved slowly, far more slowly than a typical falling star, giving the illusion of controlled motion. Witnesses across multiple states described it in nearly identical words. It moved like a ship burning on a dark sea. The meteor appeared to drift horizontally for nearly 1,000 miles, an incredibly rare phenomenon, caused by the angle of entry and the way it fragmented. For people in 1860, this slow, surreal movement made it feel alive. Long after the meteor vanished, the stories grew. In West Virginia, locals told tales of the sky serpent. In New York, families passed down memories of the burning ribbon. In Pennsylvania, newspapers reprinted the story again and again for decades. Even during the Civil War, soldiers in camp reportedly shared memories of seeing the meteor, some calling it an omen of the war to come. It became, in a way, America's own celestial folklore. Strangely, despite its enormous impact, the meteor faded from official history. For nearly a century, it lived only in old diaries, family stories, regional newspapers, Church's painting, Whitman's poem. It wasn't until the early 21st century that historians and scientists revived interest. When researchers compared eyewitness accounts, Church's artwork, Whitman's notes, atmospheric science, and modern meteor data,
They reconstructed the event with extraordinary precision. What they found stunned even experts. The 1860 bolide was not just bright, it was one of the largest meteors ever recorded in U.S. history. One of the longest-lasting sky events of the 19th century. Visible across at least 10 states. Estimated to have released the energy of several atomic bombs without ground impact. For 19th century Americans, it was nothing short of a miracle, or a threat. For scientists today, it is an invaluable piece of astronomical history. So what truly happened on that strange day in 1860? A massive space rock entered Earth's atmosphere at the perfect angle, slow, shallow, and stable. It burned so brightly and for so long that nearly everyone who saw it remembered it for the rest of their lives. It split into pieces, creating the illusion of a glowing crack across the sky. It inspired fear, wonder, panic, and fascination. It became a painting, a poem, a cultural memory, a scientific puzzle, a nearly forgotten legend. And today, more than 160 years later, it remains one of the most astonishing real events ever witnessed in the skies above the United States. Events like this remind us that history isn't always shaped by wars, politics, or presidents. Sometimes it's shaped by a sudden flash in the sky. A moment when nature reminds us how small we are, how mysterious the universe remains, and how deeply a single unforgettable sight can embed itself into the heart of a nation. That day in 1860, Americans looked up and saw something impossible. And for a few unforgettable minutes, the entire country stood united in wonder, gazing at a fire that traveled across the heavens, leaving behind a story that still glows brightly in the pages of American history.